This is Just a Thought, a podcast for parents wanting to change their minds and change their lives. This is Christina Stead, and this is episode number 40, A Full Box. You might be able to tell just by looking, but this podcast is a lot longer than usual, so I don't know if you want to download the audio version and take me out on a walk, or let me help you fold your laundry or do the dishes, or maybe you can just relax in your bed and listen, but however you decide to listen, I'm excited to be with you today. I was in a marriage class about 9 years ago when I heard a story about a woman who was very angry with her husband because she felt he was mean and selfish and only cared about himself. When asked for an example, she explained that sometimes when they were driving home from a big day and she was tired and hungry, she would say, "Honey, would you like to stop for dinner?" And he, off in his own thoughts, would shrug and say, "No, I'm fine with dinner at home." And they would drive on, with her bubbling over with resentment and anger. Didn't he know she was already exhausted and didn't want to make dinner? Didn't he know she wanted to stop for dinner? Why didn't he care about her and her needs and wants? Another time at a life coaching conference, there was a man who stood up and told us he had decided he was going to divorce his wife. She was too controlling, she wasn't loving, she didn't support him in the things that were important to him, and even worse, she told him he couldn't do things like come to the conference. And yet, there he was. His mental and emotional health was important to him, so he had come anyway. Both these examples reflect different individuals who had a want or a need that felt important to them. The woman had wanted to stop and pick up dinner, but instead of telling her husband that, she put her needs in his hands, very unspecifically too, and was disappointed and hurt that he didn't fill her needs cup for her. She made it mean that he didn't love her or care about her, and in return, she began to lose feelings of love for him. In the second story, the man had a desire to come to the life coaching conference, and his wife had said, "You can't go." But he had decided to go anyway. And interestingly, he went with a lot of anger and resentment towards his wife because she had said he couldn't go. To him, his wife saying, "You can't go," meant, "I can control you and tell you what you can and can't do, and you have to do what I say." But obviously, he didn't have to do what she said. And in this particular situation, when his wife said, "You can't go," he actually believed she meant, "If you go, I'll be mad at you." And because he felt her emotions meant something about him, he ironically felt torn between trying to control and manipulate her feelings, trying to keep her happy, so to speak, and doing what felt important to him. So he left home feeling angry at her because he wasn't able to control what she was feeling and thinking. Have you ever felt like either of these people? Have you ever wanted or needed something and felt a lot of anger and resentment toward your spouse or your children or your parents or your friends for not filling your need? The really great news, because you can do something about it, is it was never their job in the first place. Interestingly, after listening to this man's coaching, I left the conference understanding that he didn't need to be angry or resentful or even get divorced to get his needs met. He just needed to manage his own thinking, just like the rest of us, and show up for himself, have his own back. I remember when I first heard this concept that I'm not responsible for filling my husband's needs and he's not responsible for filling mine, my mind went straight to intimacy because I believe in celibacy before marriage and faithfulness after marriage. But what can one do when they need, and I have needs in quotation marks, because intimate needs are different than food and water needs, although very strong, they're different, right? So what can one do when they need intimacy, but their spouse is unable or unwilling to fill that need? Ultimately, I've decided that it's all circumstantial, but the easy answer is, what would they do if they were single? What would they do if their spouse was away for a long time? The same practices could be used in many situations. I also like to remember that everything's temporary, but the interesting thing about thought work is it's really circumstantial. Craig Berthold and Libby Switzer from the Full Cup podcast share the box analogy about how we all have a box that we're in charge of. And we can help other people with their boxes. We can help our husband and our kids, and they can help us with ours. But ultimately, we are in charge of carrying our own boxes. I like to add that we're in charge of filling our own boxes and choosing what we haul around and what we don't haul around and what we want in our life. When we feel neglected or taken for granted, the best place to solve the problem is within our own head and body. Why are we feeling neglected? What are we wanting? What are we needing? How can we fill that need? And isn't it okay that the people around us might not understand? We can love them whether they understand what we need or not, because they're in charge of their box and we're in charge of ours. I wanted to read a story to you called When the Queens Drive By. I believe it's written by Agnes, Sligh, Turnbull, but I actually recorded that podcast reading it and then realized that it was probably a copyright issue for me to do that. So I'm just going to share this story with you in a little summary and share a little quote from it. The story's about a woman named Jenny who had lost herself. She was worn out and worn down, and she and her husband worked long, hard days on their farm, trying to make life a dream that she now didn't believe they would ever achieve. She believed they had bad luck, and she took pride in the fact that she worked harder and helped her husband more than any woman she knew. But she wasn't happy. She would look toward the highway where she could see the shiny, swift cars driving by, and she felt left behind by all the carefree women that drove by in those fancy cars. Until one day, a woman in one of those fancy cars stopped by the farm to buy some apples and ended up sharing a special thought with Jenny. She said, and I quote, "Please listen to me. I'm sorry I annoyed you by saying that, but now, since we're talking, why can't we sit down here and rest a minute? It's so cool and lovely here under the trees. And if you were to tell me all about it, because I'm only a stranger, perhaps it would help. It does sometimes, you know. A little rest would." "Rest? Me sit down to rest in the wagon loaded to go to town? It'll hurry me now to get back before dark." And then something strange happened. The other woman put her cool, soft hand on Jenny's grimy arm. There was a compelling tenderness in her eyes. "Just take the time you would have spent picking apples. I would so much rather. Perhaps somehow I could help you. I wish I could. Won't you tell me why you have to work so hard?" Jenny sank down on the smooth green grass. Her haunted, unwilling eyes had yielded to some power in the clear, serene eyes of the stranger. A sort of exhaustion came over her, a trembling reaction from the straining efforts of the week. "There ain't much to tell," she said half sullenly, "only that we ain't getting ahead. We're clean discouraged, both of us. Henry Davis is talking about foreclosing on us if we don't pay some principal. The time of the mortgage is out this year, and maybe he won't renew it. He got plenty himself, but them's the hardest kind." She paused, then her eyes flared. "And it ain't that I haven't done my part. Look at me. I'm barely 30, and I might be 50. I'm so weather-beaten. That's the way I've worked." "And you think that has helped your husband?" "Helped him?" Jenny's voice was sharp. "Why shouldn't it help him?" The stranger was looking away through the green stretches of orchard. She laced her slim hands together about her knees. She spoke slowly. "Men are such queer things, husbands especially. Sometimes we blunder when we're trying hardest to serve them. For instance, they want us to be economical, and yet they want us in pretty clothes. They need our work, and yet they want us to keep our youth and our beauty. And sometimes they don't know themselves which they really want most. So we have to choose. That's what makes it so hard." She paused. Jenny was watching her with dull curiosity as though she were speaking a foreign tongue. Then the stranger went on. "I had to choose once, long ago. Just after we were married, my husband decided to have his own business, so he started a very tiny one. He couldn't afford a helper, and he wanted me to stay in the office while he did the outside selling. And I refused, even though it hurt him. Oh, it was hard. But I knew how it would be if I did as he wished. We would both have come back each night, tired out, to a dark, cheerless house and a picked-up dinner. And a year of that might have taken something away from us, something precious. I couldn't risk it, so I refused and stuck to it. And then how I worked in my house. A flat it was then. I had so little outside of our wedding gifts. but at least I could make it a clean, shining, happy place. I tried to give our little dinners the grace of a feast, and as the months went on, I knew I had done right. My husband would come home dead tired and discouraged, ready to give up the whole thing. But after he had eaten and sat down in our bright little living room, and I had read to him or told him all the funny things I could invent about my day, I could see him change. By bedtime, he had his courage back, and by morning, he was at last ready to go out and fight again. And at last he won, and he won his success alone, as a man loves to do. Close quote. Then the woman tells Jenny another story about a queen and how she saved her people by being as queenly as she could be. And she recommended that Jenny show up as the queen she already was. She was recommending that Jenny realize that her dreams and her needs were her responsibility to fill. No one could do it for her. Jenny had to decide what she wanted her role to be as a woman, a wife, and a mother of her home. She could have done lots of different things, but what ultimately gave her the most joy and satisfaction was having her own back and focusing on the things that she felt were important to her, not for anyone else, although that love spilled over onto everyone else. But ultimately, she did what she did because it felt right for her. Each of our stories are different. We have so many wonderful things to fill our boxes with that are unique to our circumstances. But our boxes can feel like a burden to us unless we are intentional about filling them ourselves and taking out what we don't want to carry. It can be a struggle to find purpose in the day, especially if you're a stay-at-home mom. But let me fill your head with a few thoughts that have blessed me. You are not behind. You are a queen, and you have everything you need. You are enough. You are divine. Let me say this again. You are a queen. And for the men on here, you're kings. Since I'm specifically talking to women, you men can apply it however you want. But in the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, it's recommended that when your man goes in his cave, which is natural and healthy for him to do, let him be him. Go do something you need to do or want to do. Don't wait for him. Sometimes our brains get stuck on what we don't want, but as we focus on what we do want, it's easier to make that happen. Your spouse might be wrong. They're not responsible for making you happy or meeting your needs, and you're not responsible for them. We get to influence each other, but we're not responsible for each other. This is good news and bad news. It's your job to speak up about the things that matter to you, and it's important for you to do what you think is right, even when they disagree. Sometimes you'll choose to support them and do what they want, even when you disagree, and that's totally an option. But be intentional and aware that you are choosing to do that. Choosing to support something you don't believe in for the sake of something else. I honestly believe that most of the time, your family and your spouse are rooting for you. They want you to succeed and be happy, but they don't have the power to make that happen. Only you do. You get to decide how, when, where, and why you're filling your box. So, what do you want in your box? This is Christina Stead. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a disciple of Jesus Christ. He loves you. He loves me. And he loves us. This is Just a Thought, a podcast for parents wanting to change their mind and change their lives.